Corporal Clan, and welcome to the Algernon Chronicles. This series will discuss the world that is designated Algernon, which the U.S. government has been funneling resources into for the past few months, though no one knows the reason as to why. But that is far into the future. Let's focus on a brief overview of the dimension in the state that the U.S. first found it in. Dimension Algernon is a world set roughly early 90s with a hint of futuristic technologies. Mechs, laser weapons the size of houses, and early versions of smartphones. But don't let that confuse you, they are still in a late Cold War era mentality. In terms of tactics, hell, some, like the Scandinavian United Front, go all the way back to colonial era line tactics in the radioactive swamps of Europea. But that's neither here or there. Throughout the past 2 decades of the dimension, it has been embroiled in many conflicts. The Communist Russian Confederation collapse and later civil war, the oil wars in Middle Asia, and the Japanese Defense Force invasion of mainland Asia, mostly in the dynasty of Long, due to fierce rivalry that has been boiling for centuries at this point. However, the most impactful of these conflicts would come to be known as the Independence Wars, where many countries and many civilizations would crumble under the weight of revolt and rebellion. The world's sole superpower, known as the Union, located on the continent of North Iberia, which you can probably guess is their counterpart in our world would be the United States and North America. In North America, the Union was the first to kick off these wars with the secession of its southern states from the main portion of the country. These southern states were heavily corrupt and ran by oil barons seeking to siphon away federal funding meant for new oil wells and to export as much oil as possible for a cheap price. This has made the Union more dependent on foreign oil, which has given it a less than hopeful standing among the world stage, as when the oil wells dried up in Middle Asia, it found itself in an oil fuel crisis. And these new oil wells were hopefully supposed to prevent that. But the oil barons and the corrupt governors of the states funneled it away into their own pockets, which the Seed Creek Act was then proposed through the Union Congress to weed out these corrupt officials, which then the corrupt officials then just seceded from the Union, igniting what would be the most devastating conflict since the Second War of humanity. This kicked off a chain reaction all across the continent of Europea, as most European citizens were sympathetic to the Union plight, seeing the oil barons as nothing but fascist dictators willing to destroy a republic just to fatten their wallets. The European governments, on the other hand, didn't think this way, and they paid a hefty price when the European citizens rose up in revolt and rebellion, throwing chaos into the many countries of Europea. And the reason why most European governments were sympathetic to the southern cause was due to most of the oil wells in Middle Asia being destroyed during the oil wars, meaning they were heavily reliant on the cheap oil coming in from the Union. But I digress. The war has escalated. And as the war turned 3 months old, it grew once again when the countries in South Zulu, which would be the equivalent to Africa, revolted against their European oppressors and open revolt, hoping to throw off the yoke of their shackles, though all this did was just broaden the front and chaos of the independence wars. The wars. Over in Asia, the many countries warred amongst each other for power and dominance now that the Union position in the area has receded back to the continent of Iberia, due to the Union having to withdraw its Pacific fleet from its Asia bases, completely diminishing its influence in the region. The Independence Wars reached its zenith when 5 years later a limited nuclear exchange blanketed Europe, and when the fallout subsided, the remnants of the Garmia states invaded the Frankish Republic, which would be France in our world, hoping to claim what little fertile fields were left in Europe, as the nuclear fallout basically sterilized the land and killed anything that grew on it. Though this was misplaced, as the Frankish were then pelted by chemical and biological weapons from the Garmia armies, which killed what little fields there were left. And when the Garmia realized this, they collapsed into infighting and destruction, leaving the hapless Frankish citizens to die in the millions from starvation and the misguided attack. Before the war, the Frankish Republic had over 63 million souls. By the end of it, it had barely 9 million and was struggling to feed its own people. The wars came to a conclusion around 1991 with the Union reclaiming the traitorous South and raising the flag over the destroyed capital of Washington, D.C. Most of the states in Central Europe collapsed into open revolt and war bands. The countries of South and Central Iberia, which is Central and South America in our world, bankrupted themselves, and the British Kingdom, which would be Britain, was on the verge of economic depression due to it having to finance its massive fleet and suppressing its rebellions across its colonies worldwide. The countries in Asia are locked in a deadly quagmire and revolts, experiencing what would akin to be World War I style warfare. And the countries of South Zulu were under military dictatorships, chaos, anarchy, or those that failed to succeed from their European oppressors, heavily censored and divided and assimilated into the European overlords. Their fallout ravages Europe and has started to seep into the steppes Erusian. Though the Erusians didn't really mind, as they had their own limited nuclear exchange just a year prior to the outbreak of the Independence Wars, when the Soviet state that ran the region collapsed. When 1992 dawned, it emerged unto the world not peace but another war, as the Principality on the Russian steppes, which would be the Black Sea region in our world, went through into Armenia and Middle Asia and conquered the weakened states in the region. They swept aside the Armenian militias and war bands and even knocked back the Scavian United Front, which were relatively unharmed, but were no match for the might of the Principality. They moved over into southern Europe, down over the Kilps mountain range and into Piedmont Italica, which would be the Kingdom of Italy in our world. Though they would not get far, as once they crossed the mountain range, they found more mountains and heavily dug trench lines that the Italians have dug during their own civil war. It was only when they invaded it's only when they crossed into the Frankish Republic that the war turned global. The Union, now whole, was able to honor the Frankish Union Defense Pact of 1956 and would answer the call of the Frankish plight by sending over millions of hardened veterans from their civil war. Though the Principality was unconcerned of this, thinking them as nuclear barbarians like the ones in the Armenian states. Though they would soon be proved wrong when Union forces made landfall on the Frankish coast and kicked in the teeth of the Principality's main army, forcing them to withdraw kilometers away from the beachhead. He was not alone in this endeavor, for they called upon their allies, the British Kingdom, the Duchy of Honduras, and the Union of Norway, to help in this endeavor, which they gladly did, hoping to get some desperate support from the now whole Union after the war was over, which the Union would grant by immediately sending over foodstuffs, oil, coal, and military equipment. A month into the offensive to push the Principality out of the Frankish Republic, the Union called upon any and all states currently in conflict with the Principality to meet in the only neutral space left in Europia, which would be the country of Switzerland, which would be the equivalent to Switzerland. Even in other dimensions, they're neutral. Those who sent ambassadors to this conference would be the Kingdom of Piedmont Italica, the Russian Federation, the Russia Socialist State, the Scandinavian United Front, the Union, the British Kingdom, the Frankish Republic, the Duchy of Honduras, the Armenia states of Bulgaria and Holzdorf, the United Kingdoms of Danelaw, the Union of Norway, and the Son, all met in this neutral country to discuss what will be done with the Principality. By the end of the meeting, they have all agreed to form a coalition against the aggressor. When the Principality received the coalition's declaration, they simply scoffed and formed their own. Though this would mostly just be headed by the Principality and would be more reminiscent of a kingdom calling up its vassal states to fight. These states were the puppet states of Libya, Armenia, Georgia, Europea, and the Sudanese monarchy, to form a new coalition against the supposed aggressors. And at the time of writing, the war has been in a deadlock since the American arrival. Now, what forces our country has deployed to the region, I do not know, but from what I know, they are doing their damnedest in helping the Union. Why? We'll just have to wait and see.